Welcome back to True Crime Junkies, the podcast where we dive deep into the most gripping and baffling cases of true crime. I'm your host, Ida, and today we have a case that has intrigued, horrified, and outraged the public for decades. It's a story of tragedy, controversy, and a quest for justice. Today, we're delving into the case of the West Memphis 3. It was May 5, 1993, in West Memphis, Arkansas, a seemingly ordinary day that would soon turn into a nightmare. Three 8-year-old boys, Stevie Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers, went out to play and never returned home. As the sun set, the boys' parents grew increasingly worried. They began a frantic search, which soon involved the entire community and the police. The next day, a search team made a gruesome discovery in a wooded area known as Robin Hood Hills. The bodies of the three boys were found in a drainage ditch, naked and hogtied with their own shoelaces. The scene was shocking. The boys had been brutally beaten and mutilated. Christopher Byers had suffered the most severe injuries, and his death was ruled a homicide due to multiple injuries. The horror of this crime shocked the small town of West Memphis and the entire nation. The pressure on the police to solve the case quickly was immense. The community wanted justice for the innocent lives lost. But what followed was a series of events that would cast a dark shadow over the investigation and the justice system. Before we delve into the investigation, let's take a moment to remember the young victims and their backgrounds. Stephen Edward Branch was born on November 26, 1984. He was the beloved son of Stephen Branch Sr. and Pamela Hicks. After his parents divorced when he was an infant, Stevie lived with his mother and later his stepfather, Terry Hobbs, whom Pamela married. Stevie was an only child from his mother's side but had half-siblings from his father's subsequent relationships. He was a bright, outgoing child, well-loved by those around him, and attended Weaver Elementary School as a second grader. Michael Moore, born on July 27, 1984, was the son of Todd and Dana Moore. He had a younger sister named Dawn. Michael was known for his love of adventure and his responsible nature, often taking on a leadership role among his friends. He was a dedicated Cub Scout and, like Stevie, a second grader at Weaver Elementary School. Christopher Mark Byers, born on June 23, 1984, was primarily raised by his mother, Melissa DeFeer, and his stepfather, John Mark Byers, who had adopted him. Chris's biological father, Ricky Murray, was not involved in his life. Chris also had a half-brother named Ryan Clark from his mother's previous relationship. Known for his mischievous spirit, Chris was deeply loved by his family and shared a close bond with his stepfather. He, too, attended Weaver Elementary School and was in the second grade. The lives of these three boys were cut tragically short, and the community was desperate for answers. Within weeks, the police focused their attention on three local teenagers, Damian Eccles, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miskelly Jr. They were different from the typical teens in West Memphis. Damian Eccles, in particular, stood out. He dressed in black, listened to heavy metal music, and had a fascination with the occult. To the conservative community, he was an easy target. Jesse Miskelly, with an IQ of 72, was interrogated by the police for hours without a lawyer or his parents present. Under immense pressure, Jesse confessed to the crime, implicating Damian and Jason. However, his confession was riddled with inconsistencies and factual errors. He later recanted, claiming he had been coerced and threatened by the police. Despite the shaky confession, the three boys were arrested and charged with the murders. The trials that followed were sensational. The prosecution painted a picture of a satanic ritual gone wrong. They used Damian's interest in the occult as a key part of their argument. The media frenzy only fueled the fire. Jesse Miskelly was tried separately and found guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life plus 40 years. Damian Eccles and Jason Baldwin were tried together. Despite the lack of physical evidence linking them to the crime, the jury was swayed by the narrative of satanic panic. Damian was sentenced to death, and Jason received life without parole. The case didn't end there. Over the years, it attracted the attention of filmmakers, celebrities, and activists. The Paradise Lost documentary series brought the case into the national spotlight, highlighting the flaws in the investigation and the trial. The documentaries raised serious questions about the validity of the convictions. New evidence emerged, including DNA tests that excluded the three men. Witnesses recanted their testimonies, and new witnesses came forward. The public support for the West Memphis Three grew, with many believing that they were innocent victims of a miscarriage of justice. In 2011, after 18 years behind bars, the West Memphis Three were released from prison. They entered Alford pleas, which allowed them to maintain their innocence while acknowledging that the prosecution had enough evidence to convict them. It was a bittersweet victory. They were free, but the real killers were still at large. The West Memphis Three case remains one of the most controversial and talked about cases in modern true crime history. It has highlighted significant issues within the justice system, including wrongful convictions, police misconduct, and the influence of media and public perception on legal proceedings. As we reflect on this case, we must remember the victims, Stevie Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers. 3 young lives tragically cut short. And we must also continue to seek justice and reform, to ensure that such miscarriages of justice do not happen again. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the case of the West Memphis Three. If you have any thoughts or theories, feel free to reach out on our social media channels. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll uncover another intriguing true crime case. Until then, stay safe. Please make sure to like this episode and subscribe.